Hey Jess, you must stop the recording or pause it.
Say it again.
You must stop or pause the recording.
Okay. Oh, she could see it all. Hey, everybody.
Coming to another, so wonderful. Hi there all, I'm Dr. Claire Hughes. I work with Sarah on a number of things, and I'll tell you a little bit about the project that she and I are working on. My understanding, anybody want to tell me how long we have tonight? Because I can talk for a very long time, but I don't think we all have that. What?
7 until 9, and we take about a 10-minute break at 8.
Perfect. No worries. That helps me understand sort of where we're going here. So let me get myself together here. Do this. All right, good to know. All right, let me share my screen. All right, so let me find out a little, I'm going to find out a little bit about y'all in just a minute, but when Sarah asked me to talk about teaching twice exceptional learners so far, so y'all have y'all had a couple of different guest speakers for this class? Yeah. She normally asks me to talk about teaching twice exceptional learners because I'm Dr. Claire Hughes from Cleveland State University, and we run a twice exceptional teacher education certificate program. It is part of our online master's program as well. So that's why I get to specialize with this a little bit. One of the things that I'm hoping is that I like to take pictures of, at some point I'm going to take a picture through my little phone of this process because I like to talk about it on social media. If you have any issues with that, just let me know, and I can either give you a warning that we're going to take pictures and you can go to black or something like that. But just give me a quick private chat if that's all right. All right. By the end of tonight, we're going to talk about some real basic guidelines of talking about twice exceptional kids. And we're going to talk about AI as a way to help us do that process. So that's what I'm kind of excited about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the definition and characteristics. I have the hunch that y'all have had that exposure before, yes? Yep. You've probably had different groups of folks come talk about what is a twice exceptional kid and what do they look like in your classroom. And so I'll touch on it because it's important to just sort of know where I'm coming from, but it's not going to be a lot of instructional place. Then I am going to spend much more time on teaching twice exceptional children. And then I'm going to talk about AI, and then I'll briefly talk about collaboration, and then we'll wrap up today. Sound like a plan? Good. All right. Quick introductions. In the chat, if y'all don't mind, let me pull up my chat. Let me know who in here is teaching elementary. There you go. All right. Who in here is teaching middle grades? Nope, nobody. Oh, got a couple. Okay. How about high school? Any high school teachers here? Elementary K2. There you go. 10th grade. There you go. That's definitely high school. All right. How many of you are special educators? Go ahead and put into the chat if you're a special educator. Autism. There you go. All right. SPED 612. There's your high school. All right. There you go. How about gifted education? Anybody just gifted ed? Oh, my infant to adult. Whew. All right, elementary, is that elementary gifted or is that elementary? Anybody in here teach who in here teaches twice exceptional kids? And I'm assuming that you all do for some degree. Oh, primary talent development. There you go. You are 2E. Absolutely. That's my next question. A few in each class. Absolutely. How many of you are 2E? Anybody else wanna own it? I am for sure. There you go. Yeah, it's fun to start discovering this. Research is me search. Anybody parent of a twice exceptional child? Guilty TLD. There you go. Yeah, that too. Oh, fun. Oh my gosh. Yep. So we live it from all these different experiences. We live it as parents, we live it as teachers, we live it as at different levels of teaching, we live it as ourselves. So when we're going to talk about teaching twice exceptional kids, we're going to sort of bring all of those experiences sort of to life, as it were. I'm going to talk briefly about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about me, about my journey as well, so you can sort of see the thing. So as I said, I'm Claire Hughes. I'm professor of gifted ed, special ed, and twice exceptional education at Cleveland State University. I'm very excited because it's the first twice exceptional teacher education program in the country. We do have a couple of other graduate programs around, but we focus on this this place between gifted ed and special ed. I started off in Albuquerque, New Mexico, got my master's in special ed and gifted because I tutored this kid who was twice exceptional. And then I got to teach in a twice exceptional child find project. And then I went and got my doctorate in both gifted ed and special ed at the College of William and Mary. And then got to teach as a Fulbright to Greece and got to go teach as a special education head of special ed department at Canterbury Christ Church University. Worked for a number of years at the College of Coastal Georgia in special ed elementary degree focus. And then here I am at Cleveland, but I still live in Georgia. So the joke I always make is it's a heck of a commute. My program's online, so I go up to meet with school districts and I go up to do various meetings, but my husband still has a job down here and frankly, it's warmer. So it's a nicer place to live. One of the things when we talk about twice exceptional kids is these are my labels. You can see that I have degrees and where I've been and the labels that we bring to the process. Oh, and I'm also, and this is a quick pitch. I'm president of the Association for the Gifted Division of the Council for Exceptional Children. And I'll end with this tonight, but I hope y'all have heard the information that we're giving away free memberships to the Council for Exceptional Children. Good job. Go, Sarah. Yeah, we're really trying to promote that. So these are all of my labels. When you get a kid on your roster, you're going to get these labels. And as a parent, you're going to get these labels and they sometimes work and they sometimes don't. But labels tell us something about kids, but they sure don't tell us like how to teach a kid. And they don't tell us much about the kid. So when we want to think about the kid, we got to think about what the kid loves. Because what the kid loves is really the most important thing. So working with me, for example, you got to know that I love my family. I've got a twice exceptional husband, 2 twice exceptional young adult children, and I love the beach, and I love my dog and my grand dog and my cat and my grandcat, and love donuts and love a restaurant called The Porch and another one you'll hear about later. So these are the things that I love. So if you really want to connect with me, we could connect over dogs, we could connect over kids, we could connect over donuts. There's a variety of things that we could connect with. And that's really what teaching is all about, as we know, is that connection. So it goes way beyond the labels. It's that sense of loves. What do you love? So as I said, I came into Twice Exceptional as a young teacher in New Mexico. These were my advisors at the time. And then I got my doctorate at William and Mary in both special ed and gifted ed under Joyce Van Tassel Basca. So if you know that name, it has to do with curriculum. She was sort of the goddess of curriculum, as I affectionately called her. And then I gave birth to 2 twice exceptional children and realized I knew nothing. That my experience as a parent was very different as a teacher. Everyone kept saying, "Oh, how good, how lovely that they were born to you," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's different. It's very different. It's very, very, it's personal to me. When we talk about twice exceptional kids, then it's a very personal experience." My daughter was diagnosed with autism at age 2, my son, and undiagnosed with autism at age 6 because she was in age appropriate levels, and we decided not to fight it. But does she still have autism? Yes. Is she autistic? No. And I'll talk about what that means in just a second. My son is what I call a label walker. He flirted with dysgraphia. Here's an example of him in 5th grade, his handwriting in 5th grade. And he had a 504 accommodation, so he could use computers. As you can see, he had some assignment where he had to write, and he couldn't write very well. He also had anxiety disorder. He also flirted with Tourette's. He also flirted with autism. ADHD seems sort of here to stay, but it's a wide and variety case. Shameless plug, because of all of my experience as a parent, I wrote a book called Parenting Bright Kids with Autism. And we talked a lot about the neurodiversity aspect and how my experiences as a teacher are very different than my experiences as a parent because it's personal. So by now, I'm very curious how would y'all classify your backgrounds with Twice Exceptional? Would you say I would hope by this point you are not at a snicker level. So a snicker level is like, I have no idea. An M&M level is like, I've heard pieces of it. Twixt is, I'm figuring this out. I know a decent amount and I'm learning a lot. And then Bueno, I got this and I would love to help you teach this. Like I'm here to pick up specific information. Go ahead in the chat. Tell me where you are in terms of your knowledge level at this point. Where are you feeling confident? Got some Twix, got a couple of Buenos. Lots of Twix. Okay. Between and Twix. There you go. Okay, so heading for Buenos, not quite, but lots of Twix. Okay, good. By now, you've definitely learned that you've met one Twice Exceptional kid, you've met one Twice Exceptional kid. That when you have the wide variety of disabilities and then the wide variety of talents and abilities, you get this very individualistic, very unique kind of kiddo. And so are we talking academic? Are we talking leadership? Are we talking what kind of disability are we talking about? What, so there's no such thing as a Twice Exceptional child. That's definitely one of the hallmarks that you've found. What I tend to focus more on is this concept of how do we talk about twice exceptionality? How do we talk about this to them? And it's because this quote sort of sums up the whole thing that I really, really like. Why are teachers so important? Because it's the story that they tell inside their head. It's like everyone tells a story about themselves inside their own head, always, all the time. That story makes you what you are. We build ourselves out of that story. And when I think about school and education, I want to think about this building, what we're building out of that story, how we do that. And I'm sure that you figured out that there's tons of famous Twice Exceptional people. So there's the easiest way to find examples of Twice Exceptional people is to Google famous people with disabilities, and you get this whole list. Now, it appears to be most of them, I will say that when you get this list of people, most of them tend to be male and hot. There is this sort of, how did they become famous? But what I find really interesting is that they didn't become famous for their disability. They became famous because of their ability. So when we say famous people with a disability, it's really the ability that got them there. But people tend not to focus on that. And so it's that somebody along the way told David Beckham that, you're a really good football player. And somebody told Michael Jordan at some point, my goodness, you can play basketball really well. His mother, he was cut from his 9th grade basketball team, and his mother kept saying, nope, you've got the talent, boy. You know how to think this game through. And so somebody helped him write that story inside their head of what it's like to be twice exceptional. Now, when we talk about the numbers of twice exceptional, and I know every school district does this, I can't tell you how many times in my life I've been told, nah, they're such a niche small group. But I'm like, they're really not. So if you talk about, I tend to start with the definition from Baum that's significant strengths, significant weaknesses. I don't go with are they labeled or not, because labeling is so problematic. If you look at kids with disabilities, they are about 10% of any population. And if you look at gifted population, you can go 25%, 5%, 10%, whatever. Let's just say 10%. So if you do 10% of 10%, you should have 1%, which is 1 out of 100, which is 1 in every grade level. They're not that rare. And I know in some places like Ohio, and I know certainly in Montgomery County, the percentage of kids who are twice exceptional is actually much higher than 1%. So that's just sort of interesting. If you think about 10% of gifted kids, just even looking at identified gifted kids, are we finding them? And the answer is no. So we're only finding about 2 to 3% of them. We're missing enormous numbers of them. You're doing a better job in Maryland than certainly almost any other places, but we're still missing enormous numbers of them. Brief history of Twice Exceptional. You've probably had folks from these different places come talk to you, which is exciting. We're a small group. So in 1976, this is kind of why are you sitting here today in 2025? In 1976, 94-142 was written setting up special ed in all the categories. And in 1977, June Maker wrote a book because she was at the U.S. Department of Education. And she said, you know, you could, all those categories except intellectual and developmental delay, they also could be gifted. And so she wrote a book called The Gifted Handicapped Child. Right after that, a couple of folks started the Gifted Learning Disabled program in Montgomery County. So y'all are the oldest, y'all know this, but y'all are the oldest, woo, 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 woo. Y'all are the oldest public school, the oldest school program out there. And so what I find it is that it speaks to is that the theory has had to catch up with y'all because y'all have been living this for 40 years, whereas the books and the research are trying to catch up with you. But y'all know this better than anybody else. So when I first met Sarah, I fangirled a little bit for her. I was like, oh my gosh, y'all are doing it. In the 1990s, we started getting some research reports. 1992, we got one of the first books out. I came along in the 1990s as that Twice Exceptional project in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was called 2X at the time. And then in the early 2000s, Bridges Academy started, and they were a high school, and then they became a graduate school. So Bridges Graduate School started in the early 2000s. And they started really looking at, and they're a private school in Los Angeles. Their graduate school is growing very quickly. But they came out, because they're in Los Angeles, they came out with 2 movies, 2E the movie and Teaching 2E. So if you're ever want to go spend a couple of days, have y'all had a chance to even watch those movies? They're pretty good. I'd be very curious what y'all think of the Teaching 2E movie, because it's not based off of your experience, it's based off of their experience. So like I said, y'all can definitely relate to it. And I think it's free on streaming. I think it's on reel.com, REEL. Google it, find it. It's not on the major streaming services, but it's still out there. In 2021, there was a neurodiversity conference in Iowa that talked about the biology of gifted kids with autism. And then in 2024, the 2E Twice Exceptional Teacher Education Program started at Cleveland State. So that's kind of why you're here. And you can see that y'all started it. You're at the very, very beginning of this whole process. In 2013, a group of, so I know that y'all have seen definitions, and I know that you've read up on definitions. The definitions came about with a bunch of people saying we need a national definition, not an individual, not a university, not a theorist, but we need a group to get together. So a group got together in funding with IDA partnership and kind of came together to find out what is twice exceptional. That definition got amended by the Council for Exceptional Children. You've probably seen this definition, I hope, that they have ability and disability, and sometimes the ability dominates and sometimes the disability dominates, and most of the time they mask each other. This is what I call the duck concept, which is where you see a duck and they look very fine on the top and everything's fine, but they're paddling like crazy underneath because And so these are the kids who aren't picked up by either gifted or special ed because they're not struggling enough to look like they have a disability, but they don't look sharp, smart enough that they look like they're gifted. But in reality, they're compensating for each other all over the place. And so that's what like I said, the duck. And what we added at CEC was that they come from and are impacted by neurological, linguistic, socioeconomic, individual, and cultural diversity. So this recognition that they come from a lot of different places and have these pieces. You've probably seen this definition. It's one of the most prominent ones. I really like it. It's about Susan Baum, who's sort of one of the godmothers. Yep, of It Ain't Easy Being Green. She talks about the yellow of giftedness and the blue of disability, and they come together and they make green. Metaphors are really powerful ways of talking about twice exceptional kids, talking to somebody who doesn't understand. I'm sure that many of y'all, like me, have heard tons of people go, "Oh, I didn't know you could have a disability and be gifted at the same time. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum, right?" And I'm like, no, yes, they can occur together. No, they're not opposites from each other. So the green is a really powerful metaphor for talking about, yes, they overlap. And green is not yellow, but it's not blue, and it's its own color, but it's related to. So it's a very good metaphor for describing that overlap. What I really like is when you talk about services, though. So the fight that we often had is they'll be fine. Give them special ed, a little bit of gifted, and they'll be fine. Eleanor Van Gerven talks about you can't just add gifted and add special ed and make it okay because these kids are 1 + 1 = 3. You add gifted with a disability and it ends up being more complex than just adding the two services together. So no, you can't just add the services together. And at Cleveland State, we use the metaphor of the bee. So you can see how we talk about the kid, we talk about the services. And then at Cleveland State, because we talk about teachers, we use them, as I said, the metaphor of the bee. So, and I have to confess, I'm actually a little scared of bees, but I'm fascinated by them at the same time. Because in the 1930s, one of the big scientists at the time said, bee flight is aerodynamically impossible. And yeah, that's okay. NASA used to have this phrase, and it was up there, and the Bee Movie took it too and used it. But this phrase that NASA had, like, for one of their sort of inspirational things was, according to all known laws of aviation, there's no way a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyways, because bees don't care what humans think is impossible. Cute little phrase. Like I said, NASA had it on its walls for years because it's true. According to the laws of aerodynamics, bees' wings are too short and their bodies are too big and they shouldn't be able to fly. And they couldn't figure that out. I mean, we've lived with bees for so long, thousands of years, and we don't know how they fly. And it literally was 20 years ago that Caltech scientists finally figured this out. And so they don't follow the rules of aviation. They don't fly like any other insect. They don't flap their wings. They spin their wings in figure eights and flap them. So there's a flap and a spin going on at the same time. And what that does is that creates these little vortices underneath. Basically, they're flying off by creating little tiny tornadoes, little tiny hurricanes underneath their wings. And I read a thing that I thought was hilarious. The scientist said, "I would not design a bee this way. This is not how I would design a bee because it's not efficient." And so if you think about these small creatures that are not flying the way that they're supposed to, they're making their own rules, they're creating disturbances around them. I was kind of like, there's a metaphor for a twice exceptional kid. They also have disabilities, they also have giftedness, but the main difference that I always like to say here is that bees are going to fly. A bee is a bee is a bee. Bees are designed to fly. A twice exceptional kid, because they have these unusual wings, they have to have a teacher that teaches them how to use their wings. They have to have a teacher that helps them fly. And so the role of the teacher, that's why we use this concept of the bee, because our twice exceptional kids are like these bees, but they have to be taught how to fly. And so this creativity, this role of creativity is so important because these kids have to use their own creativity. Teachers have to be creative. We've got to think about how twice exceptional kids can fly. And so the definition then keeps going on to say that you have to have specialized identification. I'm not going to go into this much. I often use the concept when I'm talking to other people about where's Waldo. They're hard to find. And I often use the phrase that I used to teach with my own kids, which is you find what you look for. So if you go looking for disabilities, you're going to find those. And if you go looking for gifts and talents, you're going to find those too. So it's important to be able to think about what it is that you're going to go find. Now, this is really important because when we think about things to find, I want to give the example of autism. So if you go looking for autism amongst folks, you're going to find it. There's autism is getting enormously diagnosed now for a variety of reasons. A lot of which is that the definition used to be this narrow and now it's this wide. So our definition has expanded. But as it's expanded, we found something really interesting. And what we found is that kids with autism, ASD, have what's called a bimodal distribution. So a bimodal distribution basically says about 30% of kids with autism also have intellectual and developmental delay. They have very low IQ. They have very low language, very low capability. But about almost 30% of them have very high capability. There aren't a lot of kids in the middle. So when we think about kids with ASD, they're more likely than not will either have intellectual and developmental delay or they'll be closer to gifted. There aren't a lot of typical kids with autism. And so this overlap of ASD is really kind of fascinating. There are more kids with autism amongst the gifted population than there should be by straight statistics. And there's more gifted kids among kids with autism than there should be by straight statistics as well. All right, so what I want to show you next is a really fascinating study about particularly gifted kids with autism, but it has lots of implications for other things too. It has implications for the story that we teach. And what I'd love for you to do is in the chat, I'd love you to give some examples of any kids that you can, not by name, but any connections that you can see to these different groups of people. So I'd love to get some of your reactions or some of your stories from that. So a Michelson from the University of Iowa did a study where he looked at gifted kids with autism and determined how successful they were. Now, success is determined by happiness. It's determined by feeling pleased with their life, by academic achievement, those kinds of measures of success. So he defined success by measures of success, and he found that gifted kids with autism tended to fall into some very specific groups. Now, this is really interesting to me because it gives us an idea of kids' strengths. So the first group is what I call the Sheldon group, the Big Bang group, the engineers. These are the kids who put things together. These are the kids with Legos. These are the kids who like to who are building and creative and creating and putting things together. They're very curious how things connect together. But that was just only one group. So very often I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I am very, very glad that Big Bang came out because it was it personalized and it made being gifted with autism okay, that they weren't weird anymore, they were lovable. But there are other groups too. And I think that that's what was really fascinating is he said, yep, there's Sheldon. That is almost the stereotypic twice exceptional kid. But then there's this other group of kids of polymath. So they're not necessarily building things together with their hands. They're working with numbers. They're working with patterns. They're somewhat like my daughter, who, when she was anxious, would do the multiplication tables. She'd sit and sort of sing the little songs of the multiplication tables. And so this polymath are kids who are fascinated at the numbers and the sequences and what numbers mean. And so these are kids who are doing calculus at very early ages, if they're taught. Now remember that role of the teacher, if they're taught. So polymath are these kids who love math. But there's more groups. There's the bard or the artist. These are kids who are very expressive in art and music. Now, one of the characteristics of autism is a difficulty with language. That's just one of you can't be diagnosed with autism if you don't have a language difficulty. That's one of the hallmarks. That's one of the key components of the definition. So these are kids who don't necessarily use language for their expressiveness, but they use pictures, or they use music, or they're drawing. And so very often they can be kiddos who don't talk much, but then they draw something beautiful, or they draw something very expressive. And so these are the kiddos who, like I said, music, sensory, the sensory kinds of groups. Then there's a fourth group, the performers, the ones who are theater kids, the ones who can sing in the chorus, the ones who are the band kids. So the band kids, the music kids, the theater kids, the ones who are performers, who can do these things, but they're doing somebody else's lines. They're doing what other folks have said, this is what you need to do, but they're also part of a group. So it's very much of a group process, but they're functioning as a group, and they're contributing to the group. Now, the group that I find really fascinating, because remember, language is a hallmark of autism. These are kids, so this last group of the writer, these are kids who struggle with language, who are going to master language. So they're not extremely prompt in their speech, possibly, but they can write it out because they use language as a tool. They use language to make these connections. They get into the fine details of the language. These are the kids who understand and are fascinated by the order of the adjectives, and the history of language. So they take this area of challenge, which is language, and they master it. So you can see these different kinds of groups. This last group, which I found really interesting, they said, are the group of kids who are the least successful. Now I want you to think about that. All the rest of them are successful, except for this last group. And this last group are the ones who are not successful, and they are the ones who are trying to pass. They're the ones who are like, I am not a geek. I am not one of those kids. I am not somebody you're going to make fun of. And they're very sensitive and retreat into their world because they don't have the language to facilitate it, but they haven't found their niche. Now, what I find really fascinating is that the other 5 groups are the geeks of high school. These are the tables. You've got the engineering groups, you've got the math geeks, you've got the chorus geeks, you've got the art geeks, you've got the debate geeks. So these are all kids who own their geekiness. The ones who are successful, twice exceptional kids with autism, are the ones who own their geekiness and own their talents. They find others who have their talents. The ones who are not successful are the ones who haven't found their talents. And so to me, this is a really good reason as to why we have to help kids find their talents, because that's what leads to their success. That's what leads to their happiness, their financial success, their ability in college, their ability to own their strengths, as well as their areas of challenge of like, yep, I'm a math geek. I'm with the math club. It's fine. We all enjoy ourselves, each other. So I want you to think about kiddos you've known and where they might fit into one of these categories and how they can own their strengths. All right. So much of this is perspective. It's, are we looking at this strength? Are we looking at this area of challenge? How are we looking at this process? And so, is the glass half full? Is it half empty? It kind of goes back to that, where's Waldo? What is it you're looking for? You see what you look for. And I do have to throw this in because I was doing a presentation, not this exact one, but very close to it. And I had a young man in college come up afterwards. He goes, actually, Dr. Hughes. And I went, okay. And he said, so I have found this one. The glass is actually always full. So actually, the glass is all the way full. It's just, what is it full of? Is it full of air? Is it full of water? So rather than thinking of the glass half empty or the glass half full, it's really a full glass. But what is it filled with? So are we looking at ability? Are we looking at disability? Are we looking at how do we want to define these kiddos? Now, what's really fascinating, I'm glad you shared your backgrounds with me, is because our teacher training significantly impacts how and what we look for. So an example of how, this significant impact on this ability. So some of you see this as a black and blue dress. Some of you see this as a white and gold dress. Go ahead and put into the chat which color you think this dress is. White and gold, black and blue, gold and white, black and blue, white and gold, black and blue, 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 blue. There we go. All right. Now here's the thing that's fascinating. If you are team black and blue, you are looking at this going, and if no matter what team you're on, you are probably looking at this dress going, wait, how did they do that? How are they seeing that? What's really fascinating about this particular example is it comes from the internet a long time ago, is that it has to do with the rods and cones in your eyes. We literally see the world in different colors. Now, I am team white and gold. I don't even have a clue how you could see it as black and blue. Like, it doesn't make sense to me because it's so obviously white and gold. If you're team black and blue, you're probably thinking the same thing, like, she does what? And what a lot of people start to do is that they start to squint, they start to look at it, they start to look at it out of the corner of their eye. It has to do with the rods and cones in your eyes. This is a biological difference in the way that we literally see things. And so the rods and cones, it was kind of fascinating to the internet at the time of like, wait, we literally see the world in different ways. So we don't see the same colors in the same ways. And that kind of blew a lot of people's minds at the time. What's important about looking at twice exceptional kids is that it has to do with our training. And so it's not biologically driven. There is no one way of looking at it. We have to think about this ability-disability relationship in a variety of ways. And so what we would need to be able to do is to start thinking about our kiddos like this. We look at the positives and the negatives and the shapes that they make. So you should be able to see the vases and the faces. You should be able to see the two at different sides, depending on what it is you're focusing on. This is really how we want to see twice exceptional kids. And yet we get into arguments all the time with other folks who are like, nope, that's the way this is. That's what this kid has. And we're like, no, maybe we can shift perspectives. Because I can't shift the rods and cones of my eyes, but I can shift my perspective. Now, I just had to throw this in because that process of shifting perspective, Escher was a master at that. And I just want you to marvel for just a moment at how he shifts our perspectives from looking at positives to looking at negatives, to looking at the negative spaces to looking at the positive spaces. And he played around with it through art. By the way, they thought possibly Escher has some autism, just to add to this visual piece, about shifting perspectives. And like I said, he was really kind of an art master at that. Yep, one of my favorite artists. And so what I always like to end with this is this, it isn't always just the shifting of perspectives. It's how we communicate that. It's what we are looking for and how we talk about kids. So this is the name of one of my favorite restaurants here on St. Simon's Island, where I mostly live. Anybody know the name of this restaurant? Think you can guess it?
Three birds.
It is Three Little Birds, and they do the whole Bob Marley kind of, reggae thing. But you can see you have to get the name of it, you have to look at the both positive and the negative. I think it's genius. I love the logo. I think it's fascinating. But what it speaks to me is this need to think about how we communicate positive and negative aspects to kids, to other kids, to parents, to families. And a friend of mine does this activity, which I love, and I wanted to share with you. She says, why don't we take what we want to think about, what could be a negative, and think about it as a superpower. So if a kiddo is really active, rather than calling him hyper, what if we think he's super energetic? If a kiddo is really sort of arrogant and, has to share everything they know with you, rather than saying he's a know-it-all, why don't we just say, he's super knowledgeable and is excited about sharing that? Kiddos with autism, with poor social skills, rather than saying, they're a loner, they don't really work well with others, what if we say, they're just super independent? And this use of super, when we talk about this to the kids and we talk about this to other kids, is so important because we're modeling this ability to think things through. What I like to say, what I like to give the example of is it's fine to be a superpower until it becomes a problem. And we need to think about, is it really a problem? So I use this all the time, and my husband rolls his eyes every time I do it. But my husband has OCD-like tendencies. He when he has to be somewhere at 6:30, we tell him 6 o'clock because he has to straighten the pillows on the couch. He has to have the house vacuum. He has to have everything off the counters. He has to have the bed made. I am ADHD. I have a very bad habit of I'll start making the bed and then get distracted. For me and my household, I have a very clean house. It is not a problem to have a husband with OCD-like tendencies. Because I feel bad, and I've started cleaning up a little bit more because I don't want him to have to clean up after me all the time, but he does. He cleans up after me all the time. I laugh that we're a match made in heaven. I give him something to do. But it's not really a problem, and we have adapted to it. We have to be somewhere at 6:30, we tell him 6 o'clock. And so this adaptation makes it not a problem. There are times when he is super stressed, when there's a lot going on, when he's got too much going, when the cognitive load is too much, that he can't get out of the house. And then he has strategies. He has things to do. We have code words of, you're obsessing. We have ways to help him deal with that. Medication is an option. And so when it becomes a problem, we teach coping strategies. We teach ways to make it not be as much of a problem. So you can think about, is it a superpower? And then when it becomes a problem, how are we going to deal with that? What are the strategies for when it becomes a problem? So I think that kind of framing of language is so important when we think about how we're talking about our kiddos. Part of that definition also talks about educational opportunities that develop the interests, gifts, and talents while also meeting their learning needs. This is what this whole most of tonight's really going to talk about. I've been setting us up to this point, but I want to start with a video that, I'm going to be honest with you, blew my It really was fascinating. And it if you think about special ed and gifted ed are both related to this concept of average. You've got the general classroom, and then you've got kids who are struggling, and you have kids who are ahead. And so we have this concept of average so much that we don't even think about it. I hope, has anybody in here read oh phooey, what's the book called? Todd Rose's The End of Average book. Anybody read that? Well, I can highly recommend it. There's a video here I'm going to show you about 6 minutes that talks about it, but it talks about it in terms of school. So I'm going to play this video. I hope it plays for me. Let me know if you can't hear it.
Your life is your choice.
Sorry.
So if you feel stuck, choose to get an accounting fundamental certificate from
This is not part of the video.
School of Business and take just 6.
Why?
Welcome to 5 More Minutes, helpful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore, and this episode is The End of Average. Today, I have to give a really big shout out to Todd Rose because our episode is based around a story that he tells in his book, The End of Average. Go buy this book, go read this book. This book totally helped me understand not only my own tumultuous experience in school, but also my understanding of how to approach curriculum as a teacher. Because what I realized after reading this book is that the idea of should is a direct connection to the concept of average and our ongoing fight against the green. Todd Rose talks about average in the book and actually mentions it as being a very useful concept when comparing large groups of one dimension. Like, for example, if you're comparing the height of a Canadian and comparing that to the average height of an American, that's a great use of average. Big sample size, comparing one dimension. Education, however, isn't that simple. First of all, we're not comparing groups to each other. We're comparing individuals to a group. Second, those individuals that we're comparing are not one-dimensional. People are not just height. Not even paper is one-dimensional. To prove this point further, Todd Rose tells a story about airplanes. In the 1950s, fighter jet pilots, they weren't performing well, and some were even getting injured in their cockpits because they were getting jostled around a little bit. They weren't able to reach for the controls effectively to help them make those split-second decisions needed to operate a plane that's flying like at 1 billion miles an hour. Something just had to be done. So a very smart Air Force researcher went and found 4,000 pilots and took their measurements, the length of their arms and their legs, the width of their hips and their shoulders, 10 dimensions in total, to try and use that data to design a better cockpit for the pilots. Now, in the age of standardization, we could simply just average these measurements and design a perfectly standardized plane. Most people are average, right? Well, you tell me, how many of those 4,000 pilots do you think would fit into an average plane? Just give me a ballpark. 0, none, nada. Not one of those pilots could fit because not one of those 4,000 pilots had the exact combination of all the measurements in every dimension. The average plane was being designed for a mythical green pilot. Now, another solution might be to use those measurements and design custom-made individualized planes for every pilot. That would totally work. It just might not be the most cost-effective option though. Okay, so what do? One individualized plane for every pilot won't work, and one standardized plane for all pilots also isn't working. Is there another option? Well, that very smart researcher realized the solution. It wasn't the average measurements of the dimensions that was needed to design the plane, it was the range of dimensions. Because using a range, the planes could become adjustable. How many pilots can fit into a plane that's adjustable? Every single one. It's the reason why we have adjustable seats in our cars. Because you can't just chop off someone's legs if they're too tall. It's so messy. Okay, now let's think about this in terms of curriculum. For years and years and years, we have been struggling with exactly the same problem. We've been trying to fit students into a standardized curricular plane. The error, though, is in the assumption in both of these scenarios is that the plane or the curriculum is static and that it's the pilots and the students that are malleable. The reality is that no one actually fits. We have designed curriculum for mythical green students based on averages of multi-dimensional people. Now, just like a plane, it's not cost-effective or efficient to design individualized, custom-made curriculum for every individual student. But we're also realizing that it's also impossible to have one standardized curriculum for every individual student. It is quite the dilemma. But what if we approached it in the same way? What if we stopped looking at the average and instead started to look at the range of our learners? What are their dimensions? But not in terms of what's missing, but instead, what do they bring? What are their stories? What are their histories? Or as my good friend Leighton calls it, their funds of knowledge. How do we find out and use what our students bring in all of their dimensions and design a curriculum that's adjustable just for them? This type of curriculum would allow all students to be successful, every single one. But here's the kicker. In this part really got me. I was thinking about this one day and I was imagining a pilot like crawling into an adjustable plane. And I asked myself, who's making these adjustments? And then it hit me, the pilot. The pilot is making the adjustments. And then when I started thinking about my own students and I realized, wait a second, who's making the adjustments for them? It wasn't them, it was me. I was making the adjustments, the teacher. You know, we talk all the time about growth mindset and student agency, self-regulation of learning, and I realized that this is it. This is what we're talking about. How do we teach students to make the adjustments that they need so that they can fly the plane? We have been so focused on trying to get kids to fit into the plane that we've totally forgotten that fitting into the plane isn't even the goal. The goal is to fly it, to fly the plane. It's our job to teach them how to make the adjustments that they need. Once they figure that out, they can take that plane wherever they want. So this, my friends, is our job. How do we design an adjustable plane? How do we make curriculum responsive to our specific group of learners? There could be a billion answers to those questions. I'll leave you with this. What are you already doing? How are you already getting to know your learners, making adjustable curriculum, finding success for every single learner? This is the question I'll leave you with today. But then I'll say, are you ready to see the end of average?
All right. So what I'd love to do is to hear from you in the chat. I want y'all to type in something you want to remember from that video. Something that hit you, something that was important, something that was relevant. And the reason I'm having you do this is there's a wonderful phrase out there that people don't learn from experiences, they learn from reflecting on experiences. So I'd love to hear your reflections on this. Not so smart, Tame, for average. I know. The goal is to fly the plane. Oh, you can. It's on YouTube. That's why you had that little beginning. Just Google end of average Shelley Moore and it'll come right up. What are you already doing? Yep. You're already doing a bunch of it. How to make their own adjustments. Exactly. There you go. So one of the things that I want you, the next time you get in your car and every time my husband and I drive the car, he's much taller than I am. Every time we get in the car when the other person is driven, we're like, oh, and we have to adjust the car seats. That adjustment of car seats, that technology came about in the 1950s from this study. It came from the Air Force that basically said, oh, well, we need to adjust the cockpits. And then the car dealer said, oh, we could adjust the cars as well. So this whole study of there's no such thing as an average driver, there's a range of drivers came out from that. So if we think about the range of kids. Now, one of the things that I found really fascinating about we need to help the kids adjust, which means that we need to, there's one thing that she says that bothers me every single time I hear this. When she says, he can take that plane wherever he wants. You know, they come in, they adjust it, and then the goal is to take him wherever he wants. Kids don't know where they want. They don't have an idea, you know, unless they're born into a family that taught them. It is our job as teachers to help show them what's possible, to help give them opportunities. It isn't up to the kid to figure out what it is that they're good at. It's up to us to give them opportunities for them to learn what it is that they're good at. So the focus of our education needs to be to develop the ability. If you're in special ed, you know that we're working towards this transition point where we're thinking about, well, what happens after school? So you get to transition and you're like, oh, well, what is he good at? And so that question of what are they good at needs to have been addressed before 14 or 16. It needs to be addressed early so that kids have an opportunity to try different things. We can't, there's so many kids who are born into families that are struggling, that don't speak the language, don't have the resources, that who knew that they wanted to be a linguist if you never got exposed to linguistic concepts. You don't know you want to be a marine biologist if you're living in Nebraska, the only triple landlocked state in the country. It's our job to show them opportunities and to give them possibilities and to show them where they could go. And then to help them overcome the barriers, these inhibitions, these problems. Now, I'm kind of fascinated by this because when we think about getting a kid moving, kid flying on a plane, kid going down a track, there's really two motions that come out of this. I'm gonna sound like I know what I'm talking about, and I don't, because I am not a scientist. But I came up with this metaphor, and chat and AI helped me elaborate on it to the point that I now do understand the metaphor. So I wanted to give you a hint of what's coming, because we're going to be talking about AI in just a moment. But this process of what can AI do is very important for this piece. So when we think about moving anything, there's two forces that you have to deal with. The first is the overcoming the resistance, overcoming the inertia, getting a kid started. So whether we're starting a task, whether they're dealing with a disability, whether we're trying to get them focused, that starting the task is the hard part, is the beginning of it. Once we get them started, you got to keep them moving down a track. So you got to give them guidance, you got to give them a direction, you got to get, or else in this, like she was talking about the plane's just going to circle because they don't know where they're going. So we've got to not only get them going, but we've got to move them going. So those two movements are actually really different, important kind of educational interventions. That overcoming the barrier to learning, whether it's a disability, whether it's motivation, whether it's trauma, whether it's lack of exposure, whatever it might be, that we've got to think about how we build past that, how we get past that initial barrier, how we get them started and focused. And so that what technology is there, what resources are there, what systems are there to help kids get started. Then once they get started, yes, building relationships, absolutely. Then relationships help the whole process in this. So once we get them started, we keep them moving towards a direction, or it's their own direction. They can figure out, oh, that looks interesting, that doesn't. I was the kiddo who was fascinated with King Arthur. I would never have known I was fascinated with King Arthur unless I had the book available to me, unless it was offered as an opportunity to read it. Because I read it and I'm like, oh, that is kind of interesting. And I really got into King Arthur. So movies like The Princess Bride, I mean, that is straight down my alley. Because of this interest of mine, because of this passion, because I was exposed to it. So these two movements, if we think about these two movements, I want to just end today with this kind of thing. When we think about these two movements, we have two sets of systems in education. Gifted ed, special ed is really good at overcoming inertia. Gifted ed is really good at helping kids move down the track. So I want to talk, when we come back from break, I want to talk about these two systems of education, the special ed and gifted ed, and how they can connect together to bring these two series of movements together for our kiddos. All right, so I've kept you all an extra 2 minutes. Let's come back at 8:12. we back? Great. All right. So I hope you all had a good break. I was talking about these two systems that work with different sets of motions. It's also really interesting to think about just the concept of disability. And I have to share this quote because I was really fascinated by it. It's from the MIT Bionics Lab Museum. So the director, 15 years ago, the director of the Bionics Lab was a man named Hughes, who had lost his legs in a climbing accident. He loved to climb all the mountains. And he said, and so he set his life out to building prosthetics. It's kind of what he did, was build prosthetics. And he said, there's really no such thing as disability. People are only disabled if there's poor technology or poor environments. That it's really the design of the environment and the technology that is probably one of the more interesting aspects. I see Farah has a question. I will definitely at the end, Farah. Oh, have no fear. I will definitely have information about this. When he talks about no design, what he basically means is he was saying that with his prosthetics, he can still climb Mount Everest. Without his prosthetics, he can't, but it's the technology that allows him to do it. So if you think about things like, and I'm going to take our picture now if y'all don't mind. Just a couple of pictures. There we go. If you think about, many of y'all probably talking to your phone when you're doing texting or stuff. That technology came about because of dyslexia, because of technology designed to help people with dyslexia who had difficult, or dysgraphia, people who had difficulty with writing. And so the ability to talk rather than speak. And so those kinds of technology has come so far to helping kids, to helping adults, that there isn't a disability. 500 years ago, if you couldn't read, it wasn't a disability. Most people couldn't read. It depends on the environment. Now, if you struggle with reading, if it is a disability because of the environment. So we have to think about what technology we have that can help kids with what we consider to be disabilities. Disabilities are defined by the environment. As a friend of mine said, among people, I am not disabled for movement because I can walk, but among birds, I'm disabled because I can't fly. And so you always have to think about what environment are we having our kiddos work, and if a disability is created by the environment or not. So the fields of gifted ed and special ed are very different fields. If you think about that, the goal of gifted ed is to take kids who are sitting in a general ed classroom who are bored because they need to move ahead or they need to move more in depth. We're moving them away from the typical curriculum. We're moving them away from the age grade concept. In special ed, these are kids who are behind, and so we want to bring them closer. We want to close the gap between where they are and where their age peers are. So in special ed is very much about closing gaps, but in gifted ed, we're talking about just letting a kid go, moving them along, letting them learn, because they're not learning because they already know 75, 80% of the stuff. So in gifted ed, we focus a lot on strengths. What can you do? What are your creative thinking? What's your critical thinking? What's your content area of specialty? We define kids by their strengths. In special ed, we define things by their deficits. Problems in. When we talk about the word problem indicates that there's a problem. It's a deficit. Problems in language, problems in social communications, problems in reading, problems in whatever. But the word problem is a deficit-based word. In gifted ed, we have a history of keeping kids in the general classroom, that they have to fight for additional services. And in special ed, they have to fight to be included in the general classroom. So often schools and systems are like, oh, can't teach them. And so they have fought to get in the door. Whereas gifted ed, we have fought to get out the door. Gifted ed, we have a nasty little history of over-identifying kids who do well in school. And kids who do well in school tend to be, both white and Asians tend to be overrepresented in gifted ed. And we tend to underrepresent Black and brown children. Black and brown children are overrepresented in special ed. They have the almost exact opposite problem because they're looking for kids whose language and culture don't necessarily match schools, and therefore they don't do as well in school. So we have overrepresentation issues. What's really fascinating is if you look at language, though. When we talk acceleration, in gifted ed, I'm sitting in 3rd grade. I have a kiddo who's working at 5th grade math. Give him 6th grade math. Move him on. Allow him something to learn that's new today. So we accelerate by moving them along where they are. If I'm sitting in 3rd grade and I have a kiddo who's working in 1st grade math, we have to catch up 2 years worth of material in 1 year. Actually, it's 3 years because we need to get through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade material by the end of 3rd grade. Our goal is to catch them up. So we have to hit the highlights and accelerate that learning, not by moving ahead, but by closing the gap. So acceleration means very different things in these two fields. The word compacting in gifted ed. I give a pretest, kiddo knows 85% of the material. We say, great, we'll fill in the extra 15%, and then we have time. Independent study, some additional research, go do some, a little bit of enrichment. Let's go do some problem-based, let's go do some extra activity. There's time that we've bought ourselves. In special ed, I'm sitting in 3rd grade, I have a kiddo in 1st grade math. There is no time. And so for compacting, I have to take all of that material and cram it in and just hit the highlights, hit the main concepts. There's no time for depth. There's no time for exploration. There's no time for understanding. We just have to move through it faster. So compacting is squished with no time. They both use the term differentiation in very different ways. And one of the other things that I just thought of recently is the concept of strengths-based, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Gifted ed talks about strengths-based as developing and nurturing the strengths. Identify those strengths and nurture them. Special ed talks about strengths as in using the strength to overcome the weakness. It's not about developing the strength. It's about growing and closing the gap and using the strength as a tool. So the way that we think about strengths are very, very different in the two fields. And then there's always the favorite word of challenge. So that's a challenge for him. In special ed means he struggles with that. And in gifted ed, oh, why don't we challenge him means we need to move a little, make this a little bit more challenging for him, move it a little bit harder, make it more difficult. So if something is a challenge for a kiddo, one's a noun, one's a verb, it's really kind of fascinating of how we use them differently. But what's really interesting is if you look at gifted ed and special ed, what does special ed bring? Special ed is all about closing the gaps. It's all about getting access to that general curriculum. But special ed lives in this aspect of access. Universal design for learning, multisensory, choices. How do we give access to this curriculum that is not available to kids? And then what are some supports? What are some memory supports, some behavior supports, some strategies? What are some, this kiddo takes a long time to process. How can we support those aspects of learning that is difficult? And then, of course, special ed is full of processes, high leverage practices, IEPs, collaboration. There's all kinds of ways that we work together that special ed is very good at. Gifted ed is very much about the curriculum. How do we teach critical thinking, creative thinking? How do we provide enrichment, acceleration? How do we make something more complex? How can we do those kinds of things? So if we think about those kinds of pieces, it's about access to this curriculum. Now, both of them focus on assessment. Who gets specialized instruction? Who needs this? One of the things that I talk a lot about, I teach in both special ed and gifted ed, that many of the strategies are good for all kids, but they're essential for kids with disabilities or with gifts. Whatever we do in gifted ed isn't just for gifted kids, but it's essential for gifted kids in order for them to learn. A lot of the things that we do in special ed are really good for all kids, but they're essential. Without them, kids can't learn, kids with disabilities can't learn. So we have these two different aspects of essential. For whom are these things essential? Then we think about classroom behavior and management and behavior management and regulation and how do we help them with social emotional issues. And then of course, both fields are very interested in individual differences. So there's a lot of commonalities, but then a lot of differences as well. So what colleagues of mine and I have come up with is what we call the trellis and blossom model of teaching twice exceptional learners. And they put together, and it's putting these two things together. So if we think about what special ed provides is this system of support, whereas in gifted ed, we want kids to blossom. We want kids to grow and thrive. So if we put them together, we have this, what we call the trellis and blossom models, and we can pull these two pieces together of what gifted ed brings and what special ed brings and pull it together in such a way. Now, this is a lesson plan that we've put together then called the trellis and blossom model. As we go through the lesson, the beginning, middle, and end of a lesson, what are some things that we can do to increase supports? What are some things that we can do to provide access? And then what are some things that we can do to connect with the kids' area of strength? With what are some questions and critical thinking, and what are some activities that we can put in for strengths and capabilities? How can we do both at the same time? That's the trellis and blossom model. That's kind of what brings this whole thing together. So I'm going to talk through very quickly what that kind of looks like. And it all starts with universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is a strategy that does come out of special ed, but it isn't limited to special ed. It actually comes out of architecture. And they talk about the architecture of learning. Now, this is where it gets really cool. So I want y'all to kind of put your fingers together and interlace them together and kind of put your steeple and you know, like the church and the steeple kind of thing. Don't do the steeple, but just interlock your fingers together and then kind of bring your wrists together as best as you can. This is kind of your brain. If you think about this is your brain. So information comes up through the brainstem. You hear, you smell, you taste, you see things, and that all comes in through your senses. The first place it hits, so you've got your brain here, the very first place it hits at the very base of your brain is attention. Because your brain first has to decide, do I pay attention to this? Because this could kill me if you jumped a little and you heard a loud noise, or, you know, my dog barks, you have to see, is this worthwhile? Is this something I need to pay attention to? Kids with ADHD have very overactive bases of their brain because they are paying attention to everything. And they can't filter out everything. It's not that they can't pay attention, it's that they're paying attention to everything. Everything gets their attention. Right above that is emotion. So the very first thing that we connect with when we hear something, taste something, smell something, is our first screen is emotional. How do I feel about this? What do I feel about this? Is this does this make me curious? Is this disgusting? Is this interesting? What is this? Curiosity is sort of one of the most primary pieces, but it is this emotional sense of this emotional connection. And that lives right above attention. So do I pay attention, and what do I feel about it are the first screens that we think about that the brain goes through. Then, so you've got your brain, it's all interlinked together. Wiggle your fingers. There you go. At the tips of your fingers is language. So if you kind of see that there's language sorts and processes your emotional responses then, or this information that's coming in. And it finds the word to explain that. It finds the memory that connects to that. So if you look into your brain and you see all these little wiggles, and basically it's all the wriggles of the brain, that's all memory. It's verbal memory, it's visual memory, it's past memory, it's emotional memory, it's muscle memory, it's all the memories, and they're all stored in very different places. but the language starts to sort them into, oh, that sounds familiar. Oh, that makes sense. What do I need to do with that? And so the brain is thinking as it's connecting all those memories and encoding the information, connecting it to old memories. Then frontal lobe, if you kind of wiggle your thumbs, frontal lobe at the top is sort of the band director. This is what I need to do. This is what you need to think. Don't forget that memory. Oh, this is what I need to respond. This is what it means. And it's sort of organizing the whole process. It takes us until we're 25 to have a very fully functioning frontal lobe. So we as teachers get to be on the process of that. We never get to see the end result of it, but we get to be on the process of it. For those of you who are teaching kindergarten, do know that kids are coming to us since the pandemic and since screens with flatter frontal lobes. Frontal lobes are not nearly as developed as they have been in the past, and so we get the job of helping them develop those frontal lobes. The only way to build a frontal lobe is by like muscles, like helping them work out. Metacognition. This is metacognition. Metacognition is the directing and the organization and the what do I need to pay attention to and what's the most efficient part and how do I respond? What do I say and how do I respond? When we have disability, there can be issues in every single one of these stages. There can be issues at too much attention, issues at not enough emotional regulation, issues in language, issues in memory, issues in metacognition, issues in behavior, issues in, so all of our brain is connected and there can be issues with that in disability. And so you can see in the design of the brain. Now here's where it gets really cool. And let's see if I can do this. All right. So universal design for learning is about how do we provide access? If we think about these three stages, the beginning, the thinking, and the conversation at the end, how do we provide access so that kids who may have blockages, who may have barriers in these places can still activate? And so we think about, oops, wrong way. We think about multiple ways to present content, multiple ways to engage students, multiple ways to show them what they've learned. The more ways that we can give them, the more the brain can develop and work around any issues that might be there. So that's how universal design for learning is based on multisensory choices, getting attention, organizing their thinking, giving them words for different things, giving them options, giving them ways to express themselves. That the more we can do that, the stronger we are. So when we think about multiple ways of representation, we have to think about ways that we're getting their attention. So we're representing information in such a way that it gets their attention and they feel a certain way about it. So in that representation, we use their strengths. If you wanted to get my attention in 5th grade, do something with King Arthur. I would be yours forever. If you want to get my attention now, talk about Twice Exceptional kids. I will go on and on and on. Twice Exceptional? If you want to, if you want me to completely tune out, start talking about economic policies. And I'll go, Or start talking about the way bridges are designed and I'll go, that's nice. And I'll get that glazed over look on my face and then I'll start to fiddle on my phone. Taxes. If you tell taxes, I will start to be terrified and will shut down. So how we represent things will absolutely connect kids, get them involved. How we set them up to think about it. So engagement doesn't mean as in I get it, start paying attention. Engagement is how am I going to think about it? So we structure the way that kids think about things. One really good example that I used to did when I talked with kids with autism is I'd have them classify their thoughts. There are red thoughts, green thoughts. There are green thoughts, yellow thoughts, and red thoughts. Green thoughts are the things that you can say out loud, no worries. Yellow thoughts, you might want to think about who you're saying that to, and red thoughts should stay inside. And when I taught my kids this classification system, they started being able to check themselves. And I mean, I still remember one kiddo saying something of like, oh, well, that stinks. He goes, that was a red thought, wasn't it? And I'm like, that probably stays inside. And he's like, oh yeah, okay. So that's just a system of showing how we can provide information in such a way that they can remember it, they can understand it, they can connect with it, not just getting their attention, but how they relate to it. Then there's multiple ways of expression. How can we ask them to do something? We can ask them to make something complex. We can make it challenging. We can make it connected. We can ask critical and creative thinking. There's lots of different things that we can do as we're asking as a product, that we're asking them to do something with whatever it is we're teaching, whether it's fractions or it's ecosystems or whatever it is. But the way that we ask them to think about, to do something with it. So you've heard me talk about the trellis and blossom model. That UDL is a major component of it because it is about barriers, but it's also about possibilities. And I really want you to think about the blossoms as how can we increase possibilities for kids? How can we reduce barriers? And how can we increase possibilities? Recognizing that we're going to be thinking about socio-emotional issue, building relationships, identification of kids, not for labels, but to help provide what they need when they need it. And then who we need to collaborate with. So shameless plug here. CEC, the Council for Exceptional Children, has a book coming out in September. My colleagues are literally working on it right now. I had started with them and then I'm like, I gotta go teach a class, bye. Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners, Integrating Gifted Education and Special Education. And it forms around this trellis and blossom model. Now, here's the really cool thing about this trellis and blossom. You know how I had you doing the fingers and all that? Friends, that is the stage, that is the lesson plan. How do we get their attention? A hook. How do we give them the words and the information? How do we get them to do things with it? And how do we get a product that we can assist from them? The whole brain is involved in the 5-step lesson plan. And so when we think about the lesson plan, it literally follows the movement of the brain. And if we can think about how we can put in the trellis and blossom model at each one of these stages of learning, each one of these places that we learn, the beginning, the middle, and the end of a lesson where they are reflecting on doing what they're doing. Building in the trellis and blossom along the way. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This is kind of hard. It's a very complicated process. We're talking trellis, we're talking blossom, we're talking UDL, we're talking all these things. And so, to the rescue, AI. AI came along at the perfect time for this process. Now, I'd like you in the chat box to tell me sort of where you are and your level of working with AI. Are you've heard, you're at the Chrome level of, I've heard of this bright shiny thing. Are you at the surface level? I'm kind of starting to scratch the surface of it. Are you at the Apple level? I'm really biting into this. Are you at the Delve level? Yeah, I'm using this all the time and I'm learning more. It's very cool. Or are you at the edge level where people come and ask you for help for it? Surface level, very new, Apple, Dell, kind of all over the place there. Surface, there we go. Very new to it, Chrome Surface, there we go. Surface, got a lot of Apples, couple of Chromes. Very new and questionable, yep. All right, mostly Apples and Chromes then, there we go, okay. Well, let's talk about what we can do, how we can use this. I don't know about y'all. I am not a techie. Let me just say that up front. I am not a person who is like riveted with technology. I go to many of these meetings and I hear these people like talking about this and talking about that. And I'm like, I'm not here for the love of technology. I am here for the love of kids and to see how I can use this thing and recognizing what is happening. Since November 1920, since AI has been around for decades, but it hit the public in November 2022. So 2.5 years ago is when it really hit the public. I learned about it in December 2022 when my son called me and goes, "Oh, there's this so cool tool, and I'm totally going to use it to write all my papers." And I'm like, "You are not. Bad kid." But it feels like it's raining Legos on us. Here's this with AI, and this with AI, and this cool thing with AI, and that cool thing with AI, and look at all the cool things with AI. And I feel after a while, I'm like, okay, there's a lot out there. What are we supposed to do with this? Magic school is an amazing thing. Yes, it is. I do want to point out that every time we have a revolutionary technology, and make no mistake, friends, this is a revolutionary technology. It is not going to go away. Every time we have a revolutionary technology that happens, there are two groups of people that are impacted by this. The first group is, look what this can do. And the second group says, this could kill us. And fire is an amazing tool, and it does enormous damage. And electricity, look what it can do. It could kill us. It's an amazing tool, and it can do a lot of damage. And cell phones, look what it can do. It could kill us. It can do, and we're just now beginning to figure out the damage that social media and screens can do. And AI is kind of like, atomic power. Look what it could do. It could kill us. So the power of it is really and truly enormous. And our fear of it is fueled by Hollywood. So we've got the Terminator, we've got, 2001: A Space Odyssey, that are kind of the robots taking over, and what happens when the robots take over, and fearing the bad people who could use it. And so all of that is true. There's a concept when we get into a new technology, most people's reaction and school systems reaction is to slam on the brakes and to say, nope, this we gotta study this. We have to lock up those cell phones. We have to get rid of everything. It's a process that was developed in this name that was named in the 70s called future shock, and it basically means when these times of radical change are happening, our first reaction is to ignore it or to hide from it until we have time to adjust to it. The analogy I heard, though, is that it's like driving on ice. The last thing you want to do is slam on the brakes. What you need to do is to steer into the skid. And so if we can think about how we can steer into the skid, of what that might look like, to begin to think it through and not let big business teach it from us. One of the fascinating things I've learned recently is that teenagers are using a lot of AI to help them with social emotional issues. And so they'll ask AI, and I can speak to this as a mom. My son is 23 years old, and his girlfriend broke up with him about 4 months ago. I mean, So I'm trying to be good mom of like, oh, I'm so sorry. This girl was not good for him. But he has to come to that understanding. And so he and I share a Chat GPT account, and he was asking questions. I'm very upset. What should I do? And Chat GPT was coming through as a really good counselor. You need to find your own areas of interest. You need to build your own strengths. The right person will be there when you are confident in yourself. I was like, go Chat GPT. It's not perfect, but it was decent. And that's a lot of how kids are using it. What should I say in this circumstance? What should I do here? My daughter uses it to practice interviewing. What are some questions I might ask? What are some good answers to that? So that social, emotional, and social cues is where it's really particularly good at. Now, one of the things that I wanted to share with y'all about how to use this. So there's all kinds of things about you could use this for a prompt, and don't forget this, and these kinds of things. I get a little overwhelmed by it. Y'all know Bloom's taxonomy, right? Everybody knows Bloom's. You can't everybody knows Bloom's taxonomy. You start with comprehension, you move up to creativity. What's fascinating when we work with AI, is that Bloom's taxonomy is inverted. Now, what that means is that we start with creativity, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a minute. We start by saying, I don't know, here, let me give you my example. Y'all heard earlier about the train and the physics, right? I am not a physicist. I studied it and I passed the test and I'm done with it now. So I threw into ChatGPT. I kind of think that this teaching twice exceptional kids and these two systems, it's like two different movements or something. It kind of relates to physics. And ChatGPT gave me some answer. Or you go into you're doing lesson planning, and I'm gonna show you this in just a minute. You throw everything in. I have a kiddo who's interested. I know. I have a kiddo who's fascinated with something. Let me walk you through this. We're gonna do this in an experience here. So let me somewhere. All right. Can you see my ChatGPT? Sometimes Zoom doesn't work well. Yes. Oh, good. That's always very nice. All right. So this is my ChatGPT. First level, creativity. Throw stuff in. I need a lesson plan for somebody. Give me a grade level. Give me a grade level you teach. For 5th grade, give me a content area you teach.
Social studies.
Social studies. Using Maryland state standards, of course. All right. Any particular topic in social studies? Fifth grade social studies. Let's do government, shall we? That'll be fun. Focusing on government structure. I'm assuming that that's one of the standards or somewhere in the standards. Okay. Now this is what I call the casserole approach. You're being creative. You're just throwing stuff in. All right. I have 2 kiddos with reading difficulties. Give me one of your kids is obsessed with something. Somebody put it in the chat. Astronomy. Oh. I have 2 kiddos with one who is obsessed, and that's probably not the right word. I would probably use who is, let's say, fascinated. Who is fascinated with astronomy. One who loves to read, but doesn't really talk much. Loves to read and is 2 grade levels ahead. It doesn't really talk much. I also have 2 kids who will argue if they are in a competitive situation. Anybody got a kiddo who's going to argue if they're in a competitive situation? Yes. All right. Also, 2 kiddos will argue if they're in a competitive situation. Anybody got any kids who are very active and with short attention spans? I have 4 kids who are very active with short attention spans. I have anybody have a co-teacher or are a co-teacher? I have a co-teacher in my classroom and would like to use co-teaching strategies. Okay, so you see what I've done here. You just throw it in. It's a creative kind of like, oh, I got these kids, I've got this content, I got to do this stuff, I'd like to have that. So the first level is creativity. You just throw it in and you say, all right, what do I get? The next level is evaluation. It's where you look at what your AI, Magic School, Diffit, whatever it is, and you look at it and you say, is this good? And it says, okay, 60 minutes, analyze the structure, functions, and processes of a Maryland government, explain the separation of power. By the end of the lesson, they'll be able to identify the 3 branches, describe the concept of separation of powers, apply their understanding by creating a government model. I've got some visuals, I've got a card sort activity, I've got an astronomy government workshop. Interesting. A blank template for designing a government for a fictional planet. That's funny. Movement areas, role play props, audio recorder, speech to text. All right, here's my hook. Remember, hook is attention and emotion. Engage all students by present the class with the school government scenario, deciding on school rules, co-teaching, president and judge, students play the legislature. Interesting. Okay, differentiation, active students, quick role playing. Guided instruction, movement-based sorting, station teaching. Set up 3 areas, 1 student acts as president, small group debates, decide if law is fair. Co-teaching strategy, lead these 2 stations, differentiation, move between stations, provide with visuals, astronomy, give a special task, apply knowledge creatively, then they design a government for an imaginary planet. What laws would they create? Work with struggling readers, differentiation, given a comparison activity, closing activity, gallery walk. They present their planet's government. Each group moves around to view each other's models. Shy student can write instead of speak. Allowed to record their response. Formative assessment, quick exit ticket. Summative assessment. This plan balances UDL, movement, differentiation, and co-teaching strategies. Is this perfect? Probably not. I mean, I don't know the class you would be teaching, or you might be teaching, but there may be something like, yeah, that's not going to work. So let's just say, for example, here's some parallel teaching. I need a shorter hook. Okay, so it's a cute hook, but I don't really like that. Evaluation. That doesn't really work for me here. Analysis. What is it I need? What's missing? What should be there? What does it need to change? So I go down to analysis of where I need to start tweaking it. Oh, nope, need to fix this. So I've gone from creative, I threw it all in, to evaluation, to this is good, to analysis now. What is missing? What isn't here? What should be here? I need a shorter hook, and I need differentiated goals. All right. So now I'm at analysis. So then I can get to apply. So, okay, and it says, okay, I always think of AI as it's still at the golden retriever kind of stage. It's like, okay, here you go. Let me bring it back to you. And so it'll constantly come back to you with chipper things. There is some research that indicates that if you're nice to it, you get better results. So Sarah says that it's to make sure the computer overlords, when they take over, like us. But so here's my lesson objectives with differentiation. All students with reading difficulties, the advanced reader they will do these things. Here's a hook, shorter, 5 minutes. Who makes the rules in your house? Teacher 2 writes mini conclusion, just like at home. There we go. So now we have a better hook. So now we've got apply. So I think about my classroom. Can I do this from my classroom? And I can say, why, yes, I would like printable visuals and role play scripts. So I can think, so now I'm into apply. Yes, I would. Can you give me 3 levels of reading for visuals? Why, yes, here we go. Here are these large boxes with simple icons. Here's a middle reading level with graphics and president signs and enforced laws. Here's a paragraph explanation. Fabulous. So now I have an actual material. I can I can have it make the materials. Here are the roll cards. Would I like PDFs of them? Warning, they're not very good. All right, so the last stage then is comprehension. Does this work as a lesson? Can I do this? Do I want to do this? Is this a great lesson to go? Good. We've got it. It's good to go. You saw that in what was that? 7 minutes. We have a lesson that is trellis based, blossomed, increasing strengths, adapting to kids in my classroom. I've got my kiddo obsessed with astronomy. All right there. Hold on. I'm going to come back. I'm coming back to my workshop here. Oh, wait. Okay. When we think about our lessons, we can think about AI doing the beginning of a lesson, that beginning stage. How do we get their attention? How do we get their hook? How can we provide trellis support, activity support, blossom support, individual interest? I've got this kiddo who cannot work, who gets traumatized by this. I have a kid who's multilingual. I have a kid who is really obsessed with, Apple earbuds. I have a, whatever it is. I have these kids and you throw them in. And oh, by the way, I've got co-teaching. Then the middle of the lesson. What can we do at the middle of a lesson? Then you can ask it, what can I do where they're working with it, with some activities that they're doing with it? Then how can I close it out and have them reflect about it? So we think about, we can use AI for each stage of our lesson plan and come up with this lesson plan and come up with the materials for our lesson plan. We can start to do that. So one of the cool things that I'm so glad that y'all are part of is that, because part of the definition talks about, part of the thing that CEC talked about is the teacher training. Working successfully with this unique population requires specialized training and ongoing professional development. And I would really encourage y'all to think about gifted ed being the lead on that, because remember, we focus on our strengths first and then think about what barriers do we have in the way. What if we're helping close a gap. So IEP goals are all about closing gaps, are all about focusing on deficits. That's fine. But why? What's going to happen? What can they do if that deficit is closed? And gifted ed has that second level of movement. So special ed and IEPs are very good at getting kids started. But gifted ed is the one that really gets them going down the track with creative thinking, critical thinking, the purpose, the blossom part. Why do we even have a trellis? Some kids can't blossom without a trellis. Some kids cannot develop their abilities without support. But if we're providing support without giving them direction for their blossoms, we're doing them an enormous disservice. Shameless plug. Some of y'all had asked about this. We do run our Twice Exceptional Teacher Online program. It is on, like I said, it's online. We have it's not a fall class anymore. The ETW 500 is starting this summer. So if you're interested in it, we've made some rearrangements. We are starting with a 1 credit sort of introductory class. It's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for whoever this summer. And then this fall, we have a class on teaching Twice Exceptional Learners. So I would love to invite you to come. I would love to invite you to participate. At Ohio, at Cleveland State, we have to charge out-of-state people more than our in-state people. And so our in-state rate is, I think it's $685 per credit hour. Our out-of-state rate is $686 per credit hour. So as an out-of-stater, you would pay $1 more per credit hour than our in-state folks, which I thought was super cute. Also, shameless plug, we have a leadership, we're calling it a leadership summit. It's a conference, but it's in person in Cleveland at the beginning of October. So if anybody's interested in coming to Cleveland, come along with Sarah. She's coming. She's one of our featured speakers, and we'd love to see you. If you have any questions, please email me. I'm available at 2 different emails. It's gifted@csuohio.edu and 2e@csuohio.edu. Cleveland State University of Ohio.edu. So I'll come back to that. But what I really wanted to do was just to sort of end with this thought for y'all. And then I'm open to any questions. One of my favorite phrases is this concept of why are we here? What are we doing here? And two stonecutters were working on the redesign of St. Paul's Cathedral when Sir Christopher Wren kind of walked by, and he asked each of them what they were doing. And the first one said, well, I'm cutting stone. And the second one said, oh, I'm building a cathedral. And I just wanted to end there because when y'all go to school tomorrow and you're teaching whatever you're teaching and you're dealing with all the stuff that you're dealing with, if we can keep in mind that the stuff that the state, all the pressure is this cutting of their stone, but we really are building cathedrals for our kids. We really are helping them tell that story in their own head of who they are and what they could be. And using these two sets of strategies and using the support and the blossom to help them get where they need to go. So I would love to answer any questions. Thank you so very, very, very much for paying attention. There's my email address, and I'd love to hear from you if you have to go now, but I'd also love to hear from you right now in class if you like. So